Great panel coming up tonight too, with Miranda Devine and Samantha Maiden. Looking forward to hearing what they've got to say about International Women's Day, among many other issues we've got to chat through this evening. But first up now, we'll cross to Brisbane and we'll catch up with the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Steve Ciobo. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
That's a pleasure, Chris.
Look, I want to first get the latest on these teens who have been intercepted, teen jihadists, radicalised young Australians who were intercepted on Friday trying to leave the country for the Middle East. This is very concerning, of course. Do we know whether these teenagers, we can't name them obviously because they are minors, do we know whether they will face charges, and if so, what sort of charges would they face?
So it's been my understanding that yes, they have been issued with an appearance to attend court. So as part of that, there are a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old, as you identified, Chris. Look, they're going to be very closely monitored now, obviously, in terms of our domestic intelligence agencies, in terms of our counter-terrorism unit. They will become a focal point, given the clearly radicalised nature of these two young men who are taking the decision to leave Australia, bound for the Middle East, for a conflict zone, presumably, to participate and who knows what. So they'll be very closely watched, and no doubt they'll have their appearance in court in due course.
Look, obviously it was very good work by the customs authorities at the airport to intercept them, to realise that this looked a little unusual and to intercept them. So we dips our lid to them. But the fact that the boys' parents didn't know this was happening, and that obviously our security agencies, ASIO and the like, weren't on to these young blokes and weren't able to stop them. It just underscores how extremely difficult it is to trace the radicalisation of people in our own community.
Look, absolutely, that is the case. There is no doubt that look, these two young men, 16 and 17, were not on a watch list. They clearly would appear to have been radicalised. That's the allegation, at least. So we'll need to see what comes to pass. But what it does also demonstrate, though, Chris, is that our measures at border protection are working. You know, we have very diligent and conscientious customs and border protection personnel. It's a very hard job, and sometimes, frankly, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But on this occasion, they've done their job very diligently. They've stopped these two men, and it's really important. I can't stress this enough, because from time to time I hear people say, well, why would we try to stop these people? If they want to go overseas, let them go. Well, the reason we don't want them to go overseas, and the reason it's such a problem, is because if they do make it overseas, they become bloodied, they become much more used to working in a hostile condition, warlike conditions, are far more radicalised. And that's why it's so crucial that we get to these people and stop them before they have the chance to walk down a path that, frankly, they can never be recovered from. Well,
not to mention the bloodthirsty murders that they could get involved in while they're over there. But look, you mentioned that our border control measures do work. There have been failures, of course. I can't let you get away with that. They've obviously worked very well in this case, but we've had over 100 Australian jihadis that we know of go off to the Middle East, and of course we did have that case where one notorious jihadist actually got out of the country on his brother's passport.
Yeah. Look, I'm not going to say that it's perfect. Of course it's not. We're the first to admit that there are clearly those who have gotten away with leaving Australia, who are clearly radicalised and who now are fighting as part of IS or ISIL or Daesh, or the death cult as the Prime Minister refers to it. The fact is that we need to remain vigilant, and it underscores the fundamental problem that we as a developed economy face. It's not unique to Australia. This is the same problem that the United States faces, the same problem that the UK faces, and indeed other developed economies. And that is that we have predominantly young men who become radicalised, who have the ability, with very little notice, to leave the country and to join the front line in a country like Syria or Iraq. That's really concerning, because then they import back into the country the bloodlust that they have, the skills that they have, small arms combat, explosive combat, those types of things. And frankly, it's the very last thing that any government of a peaceful country would want.
Well, if we go back to what's going to be happening with these two, the 16 and 17-year-old in Australia, and the domestic situation, if they've become radicalised, presumably they need to, apart from any legal processes, need to go through some sort of effective de-radicalisation process. That won't be easy. But also you must be concerned about how they've become radicalised, whether there are other young people in Australia who have been involved in that with them, in cahoots with them, and whether therefore there could be some worrisome connections here.
Look, absolutely, and these are the exact types of issues that ASIO, our domestic intelligence service, as well as the federal police, counter-terrorism officers, all of them work on exactly this point to try to maintain a monitor, a safety net, so to speak, across those who are prone to become radicalised, those who are actually undertaking the radicalisation, those who are, of course, preaching hate. And in many respects, it's part of the reason why the government, not that long ago, moved a suite of laws to try to stiffen up our suite of laws to make sure that we can crack down on those that preach hate. We can crack down on those that are trying to basically brainwash young minds and turn them into killers.
Okay, I want to switch now to Indonesia, and as all of Australia knows, of course, Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran are now sitting on that menacing prison island in Indonesia, awaiting word on their fate. The executions have been delayed, awaiting new legal processes. Do you believe that there's any hope of these legal processes resulting in any sort of a stay of execution, given, of course, that we keep hearing from President Joko Widodo that he's still committed to carrying out these sentences?
Well, look, of course I retain hope. I think it is important for all of us to retain hope in relation to this. Fundamentally, Chris, it comes down to this basic point. Australians abhor the crime that they're engaged with, that is in terms of drug supply and drug trafficking, but we also abhor the death penalty. Both of these acts are acts that Australians don't support. Now, we recognise that Mr Chan and Mr Sukumaran have done the wrong thing. They deserve to be punished, and I'm sure that they would acknowledge that as well. But we also think that the death penalty is barbaric, and fundamentally, with respect to Indonesia, our key point is this. Indonesia regularly and consistently seeks clemency in relation to the lives of Indonesian citizens in other countries, especially in the Middle East. We are now doing the same thing that Indonesia regularly does in relation to its citizens for 2 Australian citizens who are now subject to the death penalty in Indonesia.
Now, Tony Abbott has just been trying for 3 days to get another phone call with President Joko Widodo, unsuccessful to this time, as we understand. Surely, given the nature of our relationship with Indonesia, President Widodo should take that call and should take it soon.
Well, the Australian government is doing everything that it can to make sure that we're strong advocates in relation to these 2 Australian citizens. The Prime Minister has sought a phone call with President Widodo, and obviously we would like that to happen. The Prime Minister spoke to the President earlier this week, and we continue to do everything that we can at a consular level, from a leadership level, that is the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister speaking directly to their counterparts in Indonesia.
Are you disappointed in President Widodo? Of course, he's a new president, but he came to power with thoughts that he would be a more liberal leader in Indonesia, and this is a very illiberal stance he's taking here, and of course it's one that places the relationship, a very important relationship, in some jeopardy.
Well, I'm not going to pass judgment on President Widodo. What I'm going to do as part of the coalition government is continue to state the case about why we abhor the death penalty, and we also abhor drug crime, absolutely. But we do not think it's fitting or appropriate for the death penalty to be exercised in relation to these Australian citizens. I'll leave it to others to make whatever judgments they'd like to make in relation to Indonesia. Of course, we're not familiar with domestic pressures that the Indonesians might face, but fundamentally, whilst that might aid our understanding about the reasons why certain decisions are taken, it still remains a matter of principle that Australia as a nation is opposed to the death penalty.
Look, the Foreign Minister and Prime Minister have both said that if the executions go ahead, that Australia's displeasure will be made known to Jakarta. But no matter what we think and how strongly we feel about the lives of these 2 men and the principle at stake, surely we can't afford to allow this incident to damage relations with Indonesia in any way, shape or form. It's just too important for that.
Well, look, Indonesia is a long-time friend of Australia. Of course, from time to time, friends have grievances and friends have concerns. There's been plenty of instances in the past where all Australians would know Indonesia has not been happy with positions that Australia has adopted. This will be a case of the shoe being on the other foot. A clear case of Australia not being happy with the position adopted by Indonesia. I'm not going to comment again. I don't think it's appropriate for me to be overly gratuitous in relation to commenting on the relationship as a consequence of whatever may come to pass here. What I do know is this, that both Mr Chan and Mr Sukumaran are still alive. We continue to advocate that they should remain thus, that there should be a stay of execution, and that is what our short-term focus is upon.
Okay, let's switch to domestic issues, and a lot of talk over the past week about the intergenerational report and where the economy and the budget's heading in the next 40 years. What do you think of the Greens' idea that there should have been a lot more about climate change in this document?
You know, what I always find strange about the Greens, Chris, is they run around the countryside talking about sustainability and, you know, sort of wringing their hands and saying how we've got to make sure that we protect the environment for future generations. But they never seem to care about economic sustainability, and they never seem to care about passing on a poorer state of the books to the next generation than we currently enjoy. I mean, as a coalition member, we have put in place our direct action plan. We know from modelling that it will reduce CO2 emissions by the same amount as Labor's ETS, in fact more successfully than Labor's ETS, given that Labor was obtaining outcomes by purchasing permits, that is carbon trading permits from abroad. So the direct action policy is a good policy. What we're trying to do is be consistent by making sure that we're also concerned about economic sustainability, and I would just say to the Greens, you know, get with the times, at least be consistent, because you should do the same thing.
Well, I just ran through at the top of the program about $12 billion worth of desal plants and water programs around the country that were triggered by fears about climate change, which are all sitting idle. I think one of them's mothballed not far from where you are tonight, or not far from your electorate down on the Gold Coast. But look, the government, that is, you and Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey have been pushing this case of the need to get the budget in order, especially underpinned by this intergenerational report. Yet over the past few weeks, we've seen you drop the Medicare co-payment, lift the pay offer to defence personnel. In other words, go backwards on the fiscal measures that you proposed at the last budget. So you're talking up the need for action, but you're actually going backwards in the fiscal task. Because of your political problems, you're dropping the ball on economic reform.
Well, Chris, I'm going to pull you up here because I could not disagree with you more. The fact is that as a direct result...
But I mean, there's no argument that you're going backwards when it comes to your budget commitments.
No, there's a very big argument there. And that is that thanks to the coalition and policies that are already implemented, Australia's fiscal position is so much stronger than it would be if Labor had stayed in power. Now, granted, we haven't been able to implement all of the reforms that we wanted to. Absolutely. But don't for one moment confuse the fact that Australia is so much stronger today, that our debt over the longer term was so much lower than it otherwise would be. Now, we're not purists about this. We're not ideologically driven about this. We're trying to make decisions in the national interest that we know Australians respect, regard and want to see implemented.
Yeah.
Now,
in other words, Jackie Lambie's in charge of the national budget.
Not at all. No. There have been some decisions that we've taken that have been deeply unpopular and that do not appear to have the support of the Australian people. So we've listened to that. We're responding to that. There have been other policy positions that we've adopted. Let's take, for one example, the decision around SPC at the end of last year. Now, we know that wasn't, I should say, the end of the year before. Now, we know that wasn't a particularly popular decision at the time, but we were proven to be right in relation to that decision. So, Jackie Lambie isn't calling the shots. What we're doing is listening, we're responding, but we remain absolutely committed to making sure that we reduce the amount of debt that our nation faces.
Okay, just finally, 1 month on from that failed leadership spill motion in the Liberal Party party room, what's the vibe like amongst your colleagues? Can you see victory 18 months away, and is Tony Abbott the only man to lead the party?
Look, I'm not going to call victory at this stage. Obviously, as a government, what we've got to do is continue to work every single day between now and election day to earn the respect of the Australian people and the opportunity to govern in the next term. That's what I'm focused on, Chris. I'm not going to get carried away about declaring victory or anything like that. We've got a very important job to do. I and other members of the coalition
team... And Tony Abbott is the man to lead you through to the election?
Look, absolutely, and I think the Prime Minister has demonstrated that he wants to both learn and listen to what the messages are from the Australian people, and I think that people have seen a very clear indication from him that he's willing to do that and succeeding over the past 2 weeks.
Steve Ciobo, thanks very much for joining us on Viewpoint tonight.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And stay tuned, up after the break, great panel with Miranda Devine and Samantha Maiden.